Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to another episode number 93 of Speed Tips by Bob and Chad. We're all sitting here, got to watch some races. Actually, I was in Yuma, Arizona at the Cocopah Speedway last week. Got to enjoy that. Seen a lot of customers, talked to a lot of people, and they had a lot of cars. I think there were 230 cars there. It was really nice time, and everything went real well. I was very impressed with the how they ran the show. I thought the show went real well and was real smooth. So I definitely compliment those guys on a very good show. A very good show. I was very impressed. It was a little bit chilly, a little chillier than what I'd anticipated Arizona was going to be like, because there's definitely a big difference between when the sun's out and when the sun's not out. There's about a 20-degree temperature difference. So I wasn't completely prepared for that. So it was a little on the chilly side, but a lot of good racing. I mean, like I said, they did a very good job. Racetrack was pretty slick, very hard, very smooth. So yeah, these guys did a good job. So what's new and exciting in Bangor, Wisconsin at Weir's Machine, Chad?
Well, we're plugging away here. We finished up 2023. It was a great year. Got to go to a lot of good events and see a lot of great people. And we're excited for 2024. You should have got your catalog in the mail by now, and 22 new products in there. And quite frankly, it's already outdated. I think we got 3 or 4 new things we've done since then, and the list in the room, the design room is long. So we're excited about 24. Working on a lot of great new stuff. We had our Christmas party last weekend, and then all the engineers come in and we go over some cool stuff that we're working on there too. So we're excited. We got big things going on the Ultra Force side with the tech and the data and that kind of stuff. So I think 2024 is going to be pretty cool. So we're just ramping into it here and getting ready to rock and roll.
Well, I happened to notice the parts vendor there at Cocopah Speedway was Pit Stop USA, and I happened to notice quite a few Weir's parts on display down there that they had on display. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, they do a great job for us, Pit Stop. They've been a dealer for quite a while. They do a lot of that trackside events, and they've handled Vegas for us a few times. And it's tough for us to get out there to the West Coast. We used to go to Vegas every year, and then since it's been a 2 weekend deal, it's a little bit tougher to get there. And then the Cocaba and the Vado thing going on right now, you and I were just talking about trying to get out there, but it's logistically, it's so far from here that, I think next year we're probably going to have a presence out there on the West Coast. Our toter's still blown up from Boone. They're still working on that. So, we had a conversation if that would have been ready to go about going this year. But obviously, if we can't go out there with something like that, we're probably not going to go out there. So, but that's definitely on our radar. But Pit Stop's a great dealer. We got a lot of dealers all over the country that take great care of our customers when we can't be in the area.
Sure. Well, like I said, I looked, I went and seen their display and everything, and those guys had an excellent display. And like I said earlier, I should have taken pictures of it because it looks so nice to get some ideas, different things to do. But no, they did a good job. Definitely did a good job. Well, if we got any questions, anybody needing any information or whatever, like I said, it was really nice that on Tuesday out there last week they had a 2-hour practice, and you can actually get quite a bit done in a 2-hour practice. I was pretty impressed. We changed a lot of stuff, and it was pretty good. I thought we learned some things. The racetrack changed a little bit more, and we kind of lost the handle on it a little bit more than what I'd anticipated. And it's kind of the old adage, the old car that falls on the right rear and rears up the left front. Those guys were able to get going a little better than stuff like ours that's a little bit more not so right rear or too right rear sensitive for as slick as it was. Oh yeah, we're looking forward to all our schools. Of course, we've got 2 weeks, I think it is, and we'll have our sport mod school, and that class is all sold out, so that's pretty exciting. Then, of course, February 5th and 6th, or is it 3rd and 4th? Actually, it's the 2nd and 3rd. February 2nd and 3rd, we've got our 4-link school, and we still have room in that school if anybody's looking for, something definitely a good class. We've got some good speakers this year, and I think it's going to be a great class. Of course, Chad will be there, and Ben Baker will be there, and so definitely something for you AMUD guys that are looking for a little more information. It's definitely something to consider. Trevor says, what's running a shorter left rear spring in an AMOD do versus the 16-inch spring? Well, in my opinion, I don't know. I mean, the spring-wise, the rate of the spring is going to be the same rate of the spring. So I'm not sure that what the real reason is behind that. Do you know, Chad?
Well, I think they're running a shorter spring, thinking it's wound up more, so it comes off there quicker. I think is the theory on that. I know we've sold some of our 2-inch raised cups to raise it up on the sliders so you get the thread. But yeah, it gets that spring just about to coil bind at ride height, so it pops off quicker.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
When it gets to almost coil bind, I think that's the theory. Is it has more load rate at that where it's progressive at that coil bind rate.
Cool. Oh, that's interesting. That's a good theory. That makes a lot of sense. Bob, what's your opinion on the right front traction bar? Do you recommend it on a Midwest modified? In my opinion, I like one all the time. We've actually, ours is a bolt-in deal, and surprisingly, how many of those get bowed halfway through the season, and so it's something definitely, in my opinion, it's. I think you can get by with a softer right front spring because the frame doesn't flex as much. So without that bar, I think you have to run a little heavier spring because there's just no matter how that car's built, there's still going to be a certain amount of load and flex on that right front spring, and so we've just found it's been successful for us.
Yeah, it's amazing what it changes by adding bars and taking bars out of a car. And some chassis builders, they put them on twist rigs and that to figure out, how to do that diagonal bar off the right front. And, really at the end of the day, that transfers everything to the left rear. So when we were racing asphalt cars, they used to take them down to North Carolina and twist the frames, and then they'd put bars in and see what the deflection was from the right front corner to the left rear. And you had to change the rate of the spring based on the flex of the car. So that's definitely something that is very tunable.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, and I think it definitely makes it very tunable. Okay. What lube for the Torrington bearings and life expectancy? Great show. Thanks. Brad wants to know.
So the Torrington bearings are obviously a high maintenance item. Schaefer's has a really nice dry lube. It's got moly in it, so it doesn't attract the dirt as much as like a synthetic wheel bearing grease does. Or a really thick grease, I think, is good because it makes a barrier between the bearing and the and the dirt. You want to try and keep the dirt out of there, obviously, but the really thick stuff makes a good barrier. And like I said, it's a maintenance thing, and you got to keep on it. You got to keep them clean, otherwise they don't work. They'll rust and fall apart over time. They fade. if you aren't taking care of them. And you're always washing the car with water. So water is your friend. Water is also your enemy. And any bearing, whether it's the suspension cage bearing or the Torrington bearings on that, you got to always be careful where you're pressure washing, and make sure when you're done washing your car that you're using a blowgun and getting that water out of there so it doesn't get any rust near any of them bearings. We just had another guy in St. Louis that had his cages, and he, just kind of neglected the maintenance there and got rust inside of the bearings, and he couldn't get the cage off the car to save his life. Well, that's one of them things where, if you're washing that car and you're spraying directly at the cage bearings, you really need to pay attention to that maintenance and how you're doing that, so that you make your bearings last longer. So again, maintenance, that's we preach it all the time. We preach it in the class, and this is the time to make sure everything's ready to go. If you haven't started your season, obviously they're racing out west, but really need to focus on the maintenance right now in the shop.
Yeah, this is the time of the year to get everything back where it's supposed to be, and get those cages all freed up and have everything working like it's supposed to.
I got a cool show and tell since we're on maintenance.
Well.
I don't know how easy this is going to be to see, but this is a rod end. This is a Teflon rod end that had, I think, 2 nights on it. You see that?
Wow.
That's why I don't run Teflon, because the dirt gets in there, gets into the Teflon, and once the Teflon breaks down, that's what you got. I mean, that thing's moving 1/8 of an inch.
Yeah, easily.
And it basically destroyed the rod end. So as much as people preach Teflon, that's why I'm against it. And we proved it again last summer that was a customer at Deer Creek.
Well, that's interesting. That's a good show and tell thing. Chad, do you make an under bumper that can win against a tractor tire?
Well,
I don't know.
You got to go around. But, when you get pinched into there, and the tougher you make the bumper, the harder you hit that, you're just going to instantly spin out if you have no give in your corner there. But definitely not a good situation. But the stiffer you make that stuff, the after effect is, sometimes worse if you stiffen something too much. I think the NASCAR cars found that out. They built that new car, and it was so rigid they were killing the dummies. So you really need to think about that too, making them too stiff where you're at the point of impact there.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, we ended up doing a stub job on a car that the guy hit the tractor tire and hit it just right and moved the stub over 1/2 inch. And the thing was, it didn't bend it back. It didn't. It just shoved the whole thing over 1/2 inch. I mean, it was unreal. So his deal ended up being a $4,000 tractor tire. The soft left rear spring is a trend right now, but I talked to a neighbor that raced 10 years ago, and he said the softer right rear spring. He ran a softer right rear spring. IMCA stock car. Is there any reason for going away from this? I run a 1/4 mile racetrack. Thanks. The trend, even in the stock cars, is to go with a softer left. Back in the day, that's how we used to do it. Was the stiffer left rear compared to a right rear. But anymore now, the way these cars work, you're using that softer left rear to compress it more, just like what Chad explained about the 13-inch spring, compressing it more so that it has a little bit more hike to it. And so the recoil part of it gives the chassis a little more hike and gives that left rear a little bit more traction. When you do that, though, then you definitely need to run a stiffer right rear. Like say, for example, you run a 125 or a 150 left rear, you're still going to need to be in that 250 range with a stock car on the right rear. So it's kind of backwards from the way we used to do things, but that seems to be the trend nowadays, is with that soft left rear and a stiffer right rear.
Well, I think hike and roll is really what's changed it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
As the cars roll steer forward and the things roll over so hard on the right rear, there has to be a spring right there to control that.
Well, and seeing back in the day, we used to also run a boxcar right front spring. And now we don't run those stiff right front springs. Well, if you don't run a stiff right front spring, if you run a soft right front spring, you're going to have a stiffer right rear because that won't hold the right side up. So
Yeah.
you're 100% right. Let's
Balance.
see. Switching from a 108 car to a 110 car this year. What handling aspects would I see this year with the longer wheelbase car, USRA B mod? Um, I don't really think there's going to be a tremendous amount of difference. The longer wheelbase car drives a little better. Maybe he's a little bit slower to react in some situations. Typically a 108 car is going to probably turn a little better. Yeah, if you're on a momentum racetrack, that 110 car is probably excellent. Stop and go type stuff, the 108 car might definitely have an edge. But overall, I mean, we built 110 cars for I don't know how many years. So, I mean, I wouldn't be scared of that 110 car. I think it's very functional and it'll do a great job for you. Uh, James, what is your thoughts on mixing gas and oil shocks? I've been using a gas shock on the left rear and an oil on the other three corners in my sport mod. And how would you recommend scaling the car with the combination of the two? Well, actually, James, in my personal opinion, I think you're doing a great job with running those three twin tube shocks. A twin tube shock, or what you're calling an oil shock, which they're both oil shocks, but what most people call an oil shock is actually a twin tube shock. It doesn't have gas pressure. It's got about 8 pounds of gas pressure with the gas bag in it. What that does is that gives you maximum feel. You don't ever get that opportunity to actually have that gas pressure like on a real slick racetrack. The oil shock's definitely going to be better. The left rear, we almost have to run a gas shock on the left rear to get the car hiked up. Plus, you can run a stiff enough shock that keeps the car up on the bar getting into the corner, so it makes the car rotate better, keeps steering the car. But definitely, if I was doing a car today, and in fact, that was one of the things that Bobby is going to Arizona this week, and that was one of the things that I had him talk to some customers, and we sent some shocks out today on some of our sport mods that were struggling with bite off the corner in that super slick condition, and that's what we needed is, in my opinion, is a twin tube shock. So the only downside to a twin tube shock is they can tend to fade a little bit, but you make sure you're like your headers, make sure you've got some turn downs on your especially your right side so that it doesn't blow on that shock, because heat will affect them and actually make them softer. Most generally, when we build the twin tube shock, we build them a half a valve stiffer to compensate for that, the fade that they can have. Where the gas shock, it's just got a bigger piston in it, so you don't see the fade near as much. When and how much would you adjust the right front traction bar? Well, I actually never adjust it. That's something that a guy could actually play with, adjusting it. What I actually do is I put it in there and I run it up there so it's tight. So the bolt, you'd have to kind of screw the bolt out rather than pulling the bolt out of it, or something to that effect. Then I have had guys that have adjusted it and said that it definitely stiffens the car up, which it would. But the biggest thing, I always just run one in there in a neutral setting, and then every 10 nights I take that thing out and I roll it on a bench and make sure that that thing's not bent. And if it's bent, I build a new one, because it's you would be surprised at how much they actually can bend. I remember we had one that we put on the jig, and the car was kind of tweaked a little bit, and we took that bar out, which it had a bend in it, and we took the bolt out of that thing, and it dropped it a half an inch. I was totally amazed at how much movement, but of course the bar had a bow in it, but I mean, it dropped the front end a half an inch, and I was like, whoa, there's a lot of load on that thing. Derek, thick grease bearings on both ends of the spring, taller than 13-inch.
Yeah, I mean, you can put it on both sides. The reason we don't really recommend the bottom is because of the water factor, but it's going to sit in the cup on the bottom side and just work on that bearing that much more. But definitely, if you want to run on both sides, top and bottom, you can. I don't know if there's as much benefit as having two. The one obviously is huge because of the spring twist through travel. It doesn't increase the rate as the spring binds. So obviously one, then, we when we were testing it, we put I think it was a 250-pound spring in a slider and had like 1,500 pounds of load on it. And I could basically spin the spring with one finger. And that's what tells you. And you watch that thing twist when you're compressing it. So, one for sure, if you put it in the bottom on both ends, then you really need to pay attention to the bottom.
Jacob says, running a sport mod, fought a bad bounce on our right rear all year long in minimal ruts, and realized that our spring table in the rear was way off. Could that be causing the bounce? Looked for binds and issues and shocks, but could never find anything. It's possible. It's very possible that could cause a bounce. What I've found is if you run with the right rear chain, and if you try chaining it down much on that right rear, that definitely will cause your bounce. Or even if the chain isn't very loose, sometimes I've had guys take the chain off the car and got rid of the bounce. So, and then also a lot of times if you're running a real big split valve, like say a 3/8 or something like that, which is a real tie down on that right rear, that can definitely cause a bounce also. But yeah, trust me, I fought that bounce myself. In fact, down in Arizona, we had one car that didn't bounce a lot, but every once in a while I seen it, depending on how he hit the corner, it could kind of bounce a little bit, and come to find out, it just was running a little bit more chain than what we would normally run, and that took it out of it. Kyle, stock car, going with drop cup from Weir's on the right side against chassis builder's recommendation. Do I set same ride heights and go from there, or does it affect the spring rate more? What's your opinion, Chad?
Yeah, I mean, you would still set your same static ride heights no matter what spring cups, or springs you have in the car. Your ride height that the chassis builder establishes for their roll center is going to be the same. Where the drop cup is just going to affect the spring table and make the car roll in the right rear and give you that side bite feel that you're looking for. So, and depending on what you have in the left rear, some of the problem and why we made so many different cups is because, depending on how soft your left rear is, it gets the screw jack tipped down so far that you almost can't even get the right rear below it, So unless you put a drop cup on it and then you put a top bearing cup in the left rear. So spring table is something that is overlooked by so many, but is such an important part of the balance in the rear of the car. So I would just install it with your standard ride heights, and if the car is rolling over too much or you feel like you need it, I'd increase spring rate just because of if you have too much spring table there. but I would increase rate before I take spring table away.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Tony says if you see tractor tires, put your car in a trailer and close the rear door. That's definitely a thought. Katrina, thanks for your help last week. Bob at Kokopah, we appreciate the BHE team. Well, we appreciate you guys. Winning that heat race definitely made him look pretty sporty. It was too bad the way they do the point system. The way they do the point system down there, it's kind of like a passing points type of thing. And of course, this gentleman, the 08 car, won his heat race, and he starts 7th row inside because he started on the pole and didn't pass any cars, and there was enough other cars that had passed cars, and they gained more points. So that was kind of a bummer, but he did a good job, and I thought he looked real good out there, and he did a very good job. So and Bobby will be down there next week, so make sure you get to talk to him, and he'll be happy to help you in any way you need help. 3,200-pound hobby stock. What is a good starting point for spring rate wise? Thanks for all your help and all you guys do. I really wished I was more knowledgeable on those hobby stock stuff. I need to get more knowledgeable on that. In my opinion, from what I understand from those guys, they run somewhere like around a 1,200-pound left front spring and like an 1,100 or 1,000-pound right front spring, and then the rear springs, I think they're running kind of the same as a stock car, a pair of 200s or something like that. But maybe one of my guys, Troy, or one of my guys are listening tonight, and they can actually pop on here and correct me on what the spring rates are. I got fairly familiar with the stock car stuff because, of course, we had quite a few stock car customers down there last weekend. So the new ride height rules kind of throwing some guys for a loop, but they're getting it figured out. And they definitely there was some chassis builders definitely had it going good, and some others were working hard on getting it that way. Okay. Chad, I got a set of your OD cups for the front. I know you usually run them with the bearing, but do you still do a good job without the bearing? Do they still do a good job without the bearing?
I'm going to grab a spring cup.
I felt that this is my opinion. If you decide not to run the bearing, they still do a good job. The bearing just definitely makes it free. The downside to that bearing is it's a higher maintenance deal. But Chad will go ahead and he can finish answering this question.
So the reason that we found out that this bearing doesn't do anything is this is just for your angular misalignment. So when the screw jack isn't quite in the correct location to be lined up with the spring, that's only for your angular adjustment. When you put 1,000 pounds of load on this bearing, this doesn't spin at all because the load is so, on that center ball that it doesn't move. But when you put that 5-inch bearing in there, it spreads that force out and lets that spring twist through its travel. And that's why the two working together is such a good combination.
The B&B chassis guys. You guys should do it's not always the motor builder's fault, shock builder's fault, chassis builder's fault, or Chad Weir's fault episode.
That takes me back to my career as a crew chief.
I
was a professional excuse maker. Why didn't you win? I don't know. Didn't have enough power. Why didn't you win?
Well, and that's kind of how I always looked at it from the chassis builder side of it. Oh, it's a freaking motor. I mean, I don't know. You just don't have enough power. I mean, it's just not enough horsepower. But I thought the B&B cars looked pretty good down there, Paul. They definitely. Well, CZ that one night he drove a heck of a race, man. He was running fourth and ended up winning that deal and run everybody clean, never touched a soul, and I was very impressed with that young man. I thought he did a heck of a job, and all the other B&B cars looked pretty darn good too. But yeah, that's the thing to kind of always remember. It's one of those situations that you can't always blame somebody because the chassis builder does as good a job as he can. The engine builder does the best job they know how to do. The shock builder, they build everything to a spec and it's good. So, you know, if your choices as a racer go against what those professionals tell you to do and it doesn't work out, it's a little hard to blame those guys that built the parts or the guys that built the car or whatever. So you just have to understand it's just one of those situations where all of us in this industry put our total heart into everything that we do, no matter how we do it. So, you know, it's I know I've had that. It's got to be that right rear shock. It's got to be that right rear shock, and you're like, yeah. There's more to the story here, and so you just got to investigate it. Aaron said right rear chain was causing their car to bounce. Like I said, that's one of the things that I've never had good luck with. Now a modified it doesn't seem to make any difference, but that sport mod with that evidently with the way the spring is mounted back there, whatever, they're pretty easy to cause a bounce. Appreciate it. Focusing on the spring table here. Do Weir's top bearings on the left. Doing Weir's top bearings on the left.
Perfect.
Mike wants to know, will an automatic make it more difficult to keep a sport mod up on the bars? Most definitely. Because what happens is the automatic is quick to respond, but it's also quick to let down. So in other words, when you roll into the corner and you lift, the car is going to want to fall down because the engine slows down so fast that the car can fall down and not really doesn't carry you on in. It's very possible that they can actually upset the car getting into the corner and make the car pretty free. In fact, that's a real good characteristic. When we had heavier cars, or like say if we were on a racetrack that's got some grip in it, the automatic might have, might be okay. But in my opinion, they just unhook the car too soon, and they try to hook the car up too soon too. So it makes it to the point where it can get free on you getting in, and it can be free on you getting off. Troy says he's no hobby stock expert, but the guys he's helped a little were on JMO. So 900 left front, 1050 right front, 225 to 250 left rear, and 175 to 200 right rear. Well, that's I was off on the front springs, but the rears is what I thought were pretty close. So glad to have some information to share with these guys. I appreciate it, Troy. Chad, with not being able to run weight jacks and having to run the All-Star Thread Cup with my shock screwed through it, where would there be a reason I couldn't run a bearing?
So yeah, we've been testing this with a couple different cars that don't have screw jacks, and there's definitely the same thing. I mean, when a spring is traveling, it's trying to twist. So if we can get the bearing in there, we can fix that problem. So we have a WM165, which is a 5-inch bearing coilover adapter to convert a 2.5 to a 5-inch spring. And those are very easy to adapt. So if you just give us a call tomorrow, we can take those and bore them out to fit over your cup so that you have the OD grab and can put the Torrington bearing in there. So that's definitely something that we are looking at to see about making that and having it on the shelf. But for the time being, we've been just taking them off the shelf and boring them out so they fit.
Yeah, that was. There's no reason to run one if you can run one. I mean, if the rules allow it, I definitely would run a bearing. Once again, like I said, I can't stress enough the fact that you got to be prepared. That there's a little maintenance involved with that bearing, but it's well worth it. I mean, it makes that car so much freer. It makes those springs so that they, takes that twist out of it. So it's definitely a whole lot better. B&B guys, thanks, Bob. Stay out of trouble, Chad. All right, no problem.
I'm an angel.
Yeah, and the thing of it was, that place was big enough. I never did find Paul last week. I knew he was down there, but I never found him. But after about 3 trips up and down that freaking hill, I didn't really necessarily go up and down that hill a whole lot more. I'm not as young as I used to be, and not in as good a shape as I should be, and that was definitely a treat. If you didn't have wheels, Troy Jervitz, yeah, my car came with an 800 left front and a 900 right front, 225 left rear, 200 right rear, but I do have a Camaro. Yeah, but with that Camaro, you'd probably, with the metric car, you'd have to be 100 pounds stiffer in the front, because the spring location in comparison to your Camaro, your spring is outboard a lot more with your Camaro, so you definitely need to run softer with the Camaro stub, just because of the location of the spring. And then Troy said he would adjust there, and he knew too much. He doesn't know too much about the Camaro stuff. Thanks, Troy, for your help. Jason, starting spring rates for a UMP modified 4-bar spring behind metric clip. Currently I have 600 pound right front, 650 left front, 225 left rear, and 200 right rear. In today's trend, I think your front end springs are probably about right, because that metric clip is going to need a stiffer spring just because of the location of the springs. So that's pretty normal. I think you could gain some things. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are running, 100 pounds, 125 pounds. Some guys are even running some 80-pound left rears and winding that spring up. That seems to be the new trend. I don't think, to be honest with you, I don't know exactly for sure what they put in McBurney's new car, but I'm pretty sure it's probably a 100-pound left rear spring with a 225-pound right rear spring. And come Tuesday, we'll find out if that was a good deal or not such a good deal, I guess. But anyway, I think you're pretty good on the front end. I would definitely look into putting that 225 on my right rear and finding a softer left rear spring. I think you could gain some traction. Jared, sweet sounds good. Yeah, lots of hobby stocks and Southern modified factory stock guys would love to have a new cup that was built in. Is there a Torrington bearing for a small body coilover?
Yeah, we have 2.5-inch bearings also for a standard small coilover kit.
Gosh, I'm going to have to study your new catalog. I didn't know you had that, Chad.
She's a beauty. We crossed a milestone. The people that print my catalog said this is the last year printing it like that.
Is it?
Oh,
yeah, you're going to have to go to a bound one.
We're at 100 pages. Yeah.
Yeah, I got one laying on my desk, and I kind of thumbed through it a little bit the other day before I went to Arizona, and I didn't actually I'm working on PowerPoint for the tooling school right now, and I figured I better focus on getting that done before I get too close to the school. IMCA modified. Oh, wait a minute. Bob, can you talk about the difference between water from the sky and the water from the water truck? It was a pleasure meeting you last weekend. Well, see, the thing is, and he kind of actually laughed at me when I told him there's a big difference between those two waters. And he says, well, how can it? Why? What was the deal? I said, the big thing is the water out of the sky, when it rainwater, is soft water. So it actually affects the racetrack different than your old well water or wherever they get the water that goes in the water trucks. So the other night, it was Wednesday night, and right at 4 o'clock, when they were supposed to start the race, it started to actually mist. And it misted. It didn't really, I mean, it wasn't a deal where if you stood out in it long enough, you definitely would get wet. But it was wet enough that it did get moisture on the racetrack. And that night, the racetrack had more grip. It was still ended up being slick, but it had more grip than when they put regular water on that. And I mean, it's just a fact. I mean, it's soft water definitely will give you, every track promoter will tell you that nature's water it's just better on a racetrack. And so, yeah, that was pretty good. But yeah, it was nice to meet you too, Ryan. I sure was sad to see your race car looking like it was when I got ready to leave, but hopefully you got that all fixed and you'll be all ready for this week. Ryan was in that 5-car stock car melee on Thursday night, or maybe it was Friday night. I think it was Friday night. We got Cody. IMCA modified. Opinion on with or without left rear brake floater and with or without the pull bar shock. Well, they're totally two different things. The brake floater, in fact, I'll actually let Chad is real good with that brake floater deal. Go ahead and you do this, Chad.
So the brake floater, I'd always run a brake floater, whether you have the rod or clamp to the cage. And the difference between the two there is that when you're clamped to the cage, you're pretty much your only influence is through your top rod on your suspension cage. So it's more effective, and it's hooked up through the spring, so it has more leverage than just going through the single arm next door unhooked from the cage. So gets the car up quicker and on the right front harder than the brake floater rod itself. But the brake floater rod on its own can be manipulated, with angle and such to make that same feel. Tunability wise, then you're going to always default to the brake floater with the rod on it so that you can tune it, from a short track to a big track. But a lot of guys put it on the cage and just adjust how they brake is the main difference there.
Okay, Jason wants to know whether he runs
pull bar
16.
Shock.
Oh yeah, you got to answer the pull bar shock.
Pull bar shock. Yeah, I'd always run a pull bar shock. Whether you're running a spring bar or a puck bar, and Bob can talk a little bit about it too. But not only is it a little bit of a safety feature if you would break the tube on the pull bar, but it's also a tuning tool for your D cells. So going to take a little bit stiffer one with a spring than it does with a puck bar, but I would always run a pull bar shock.
Yeah, and the big difference is, of course, the spring you get a little bit more travel, and there's actually more recoil on deacceleration. So you normally would run a stiffer compression left rear or stiffer compression pull bar shock. There's different angles. A lot of guys now, the new thing's kind of running more in line with the pull bar, and the big advantage to that is it doesn't really affect the chassis so much. It just kind of helps that recoil effect and stabilizes the pull bar a little bit more. Some guys still run it at an angle uphill towards the chassis, and that will tend to make the car tighter on corner entry. So just depends on what the driver feel like and what he feels like. And there's quite a bit that you can actually play with different shock valve combinations. It just all depends on how the driver likes the car to enter the corner, in my opinion. It's definitely a safety aspect, but more than likely, like I said, you can do different things with that pull bar to change how the car enters the corner, whether it's tight on the right rear or not. Cody says, stock car chassis builders said to run 950 left front, 1050 right, or 900 and 1050 in the front, and a pair of 175s. Any problems or benefits with that? No, actually, I don't think that's out of the line. I mean, it just kind of depends on, the 175s are going to give you, in my opinion, are going to give you a little bit more traction. It depends on how the car drives. Some guys like stiffer rear springs because, of course, stiffer rear springs are going to load the tire a little bit more. It depends on where you're racing and what you're racing. I mean, if you're racing a short racetrack versus a long racetrack. But I think your chassis builder is definitely, if that's what he told you to run, well, that's exactly what I would run. And then you can always adjust the car from there, with his help, of course, depending on, what you want the car to do. If some guys might like a stiffer right rear if the car's rolling over too much. It's kind of a driver preference, but he's given you a great baseline to start with, and that's what I would probably start with. Chad, having a Camaro, do you have that coilover adapter OD with bearing we're talking about in a 5.5-inch bearing?
Yeah, so we make all the cups for the front for 5.5-inch bearings, and we also made the 5.5-inch Torrington bearings. So we do have all that available for the bigger spring cars.
Yeah, because a Camaro spring car would be a 5.5-inch spring.
Yeah. You missed two there. Go back to, there's a Jason and a Brad. 16-inch or 20-inch left rear.
Oh yeah, that one was. Oh, I didn't. I read it, but I didn't answer it. 16-inch or 20-inch left rear on a soft spring like that. I definitely wouldn't go over a 16-inch. And kind of like what Chad and I were talking about earlier, the kind of the new trend and some of the modified stuff is running a 13-inch left rear, and like Chad said, that allows that car to get more of a coil bind effect and gives it a little bit more traction up off the corner. So I would consider this 16 or even a 13, knowing that information. IMC Northern Sport Mod. Torrington bearing doesn't seem possible on the left rear because of typical spring float free. When we are on the bars, best off not to worry about it because, yeah, if you're getting on and off and the spring's getting on and off, I wouldn't run one of those bearings because you'd beat the bearing to death.
Yeah, it has to stay in tension so that if it slams back down, then the washers are going to break because the spring hits it and you'll snap the washer, and then you got broken pieces in there moving around. So definitely like left front and left rear, if they ever go loose, you can't run it. And right rear, if you climb going down the straightaway and it gets loose, you can't run it either. So the Torrington bearing definitely through all your travel has to stay loaded so it stays lined up and stays in the cup properly through travel.
Yeah. Where it actually works the best is the right front. I mean, it definitely works good on the rears, but the downside to the rears, if that thing ever comes free and slams down, it can damage that bearing. Okay, stock car. Do you see people running a braided line all the way to the tranny, or a hard line with a short line to the tranny? Well, in my opinion, Kyle, I would run the hard line and then a short flex line. The the more flex line you put in there, the more it's going to flex, because that's what the line's supposed to do, is flex. So your pressure, you're not going to have the pressure that you would have if you had a hard line with with a short one. So I would definitely run a hard line with a short, like a little 12-inch line would be pretty good if that works for you. Well, we've got a few minutes. I think we got 10 minutes yet. So if we got any other questions or any other things we need to talk about, feel free to chime on here. Like I said, I was pretty impressed with the schools. We've got the sport mod schools definitely coming up first, and that's sold out. And our school out in Pennsylvania, in mid-March, is definitely sold out. And did Amy get you the flight times or whatever?
Yeah.
Okay.
You remember the last time we went out there?
Yeah.
In 2020?
Yeah, I remember it.
Remember we brought COVID home?
Yeah. You were sick. I think I was sick just from exhaustion, because I was only sick for a day. Amy was sick for like 3 weeks.
She went to the hospital, didn't she?
Yeah, I think she did. Then her husband got sick, and it was a heck of a mess. She wasn't really all that excited about going out there this time. She really even highly encouraged me if I could find somebody else that she'd be fine with that. And I'm like, well, do you have brake pad recommendations for someone like me who runs the big GM calipers? Well, I can't give you actually part numbers because I don't have a catalog here with me. But what we normally run is we run, like AFCO makes a 33, a 34, and a 32, a 33, and a 34 series. And I'm quite sure they make that in the big caliper too, not just the small caliper. I'd actually have to look. I really don't know for sure. But we always run the 32 on the right front, and the 33 on the left front, and then 34s in the rear. I'm pretty sure that's the more aggressive pad on the rear that you can get. The medium type pad on the left front, and like a softer pad for the right front. But you can't, a lot of people think you can get by with, well, since it's the right front, I can just go buy some cheap aftermarket brake pad at the local store. But there you can't mix and match. I don't recommend mixing and matching brands. You buy a Willwood stuff, buy all Willwoods. I know they're a little bit more expensive to get that right front, but what happens is the heat range, the aftermarket pad is actually supposed to, as it gets hot, it's supposed to grab more. Well, so if you put an aftermarket pad on the right front, and as it grabs heat, and it grabs more, what's going to happen to the car? It's going to push. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, I don't know what the problem is. Well, it's a brake problem. So running those, and like I said, if you've got an AFCO cataloger, you can actually look it up on AFCO's race. It's AmericanFabricating.com. And you can look it up in there, but that's the numbers that we sell. The Willwood numbers, we sell Willwood too, but I'm not as familiar with the numbers. Okay, so Jason, what are your thoughts on open versus closed sail panels, depending on the track shape? Well, the open sail panels are going to definitely give you more air to the rear spoiler side force wise. So side force wise, you're going to get more downforce on the rear spoiler. I still believe in the fact that if I can have as much side on my race car as I can, that's just like a billboard. So I still recommend running the sail panels all the way to the back. Then you funnel all the way the air that comes through the car hits the spoiler, and it's more direct rather than a side force deal. Am I thinking of that correctly, Chad?
Yeah, I mean, then there's the debate of the car being bent and the right side sail panel coming through and hitting the spoilers. So there's more ways than one to look at it. And I guess I go off of Tanner Mullins unloaded at Vado with basically nothing, and they made him put Lexan in there. So I'm downforce all day, I think, but there's probably an argument for both.
Sport Mod right rear OD drop cup, is it legal with the center bearing not fixed?
Yeah. It has to be fixed. No, it has to bolt in and be solid.
Oh yeah, that's right. It does have to be.
It can't have.
It can't be like your display.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So we make all the rear cups that bolt in OD in 3 different drops too. So a lot of adjustability there with being able to run the Torrington bearing on a screw jack style car.
Awesome. Scott says, Bob, we was in the shop Friday to drop our car off for updates. We met the 2 guard dogs. Those are a couple of good pups. Well, I'll tell you what, they meet a lot of people and they do a pretty good job. But most generally, the black and white one, he's actually my dog, and the brown and white one is actually Bobby's dog. And the black and white one, he's a little bit more energetic. My grandson calls him crazy. So, but they do a good job. They treat the people pretty nice, and anybody that's willing to give them a little affection, well, they're a long lost new buddy. Kyle Stuckar running MSD 6 CT box with an MSD distributor that was advanced spring that can be changed. What color springs are recommended, or do you adjust the box? Kyle, I wouldn't have a clue when it comes to the engine stuff. The only thing that I know about the engine is it's supposed to run good and make my race cars look great. That's about the only thing I can tell you about the engine. And that they have 8 spark plugs. I don't pay much attention to that. So I'm sorry, Kyle, I can't answer that question. In a class that doesn't allow the Torrington bearings, would you suggest graphite grease or anything like that between the spring and spacers? I can't see that it would hurt anything.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I've never tested just putting grease between the plates, but I think eventually it would get forced out of there.
Right.
We did laser cut some Teflon paper and tried that, and we were unsuccessful there also. So I like where you're going. We've did some testing, but we haven't found anything cool enough that works other than the Torrington bearings. So, because we actually started with 2 thin pieces of Teflon there, and they just they have too much of friction there to actually work the way we wanted it to. So that's why that's why we had the Torrington bearings made. So.
Danny and Mary, is lowering the right rear spring table for a dry slick racetrack a good adjustment? Most definitely. When you lower that right rear spring table, it's going to get on the right rear easier. So the car is not going to, it's going to get over on the right rear and give you more side bite. So in my opinion, yes, it would be. Now,
especially when it's slow and slick, because you don't have the momentum to get you over there in the centrifugal force when you're going so fast to get the car to roll over. So it's definitely a good adjustment when it's slow.
Well, and that's why, like, even sometimes, our new 2024 Sport Mod. In fact, I have to brag on that 2024 Sport Mod. Cam Reamers won the first night there, and that was pretty cool. I thought that was a nice way to start the week. Anyway, that particular car, the way those cars are built, we have to run an 11-inch spring to get the spring table where we want it. So on those cars, the new cars, we run an 11-inch left rear or right rear spring with a 13-inch left rear spring, and that seems to help those cars get over on the right rear. What effect would shortening the upper right front ball joint a half an inch do? Does that help get the car on the right front more? Well, what it basically is doing is it's moving your roll center, it's changing your roll center, and it's actually moving it more to the left. So in my opinion, it would definitely help get it on the right front more. That's always been an adjustment that we've always run. Like with our stuff, we always run a half-inch longer left front upper ball joint than we do a right front, and that seems to work real good. I know some guys have run a longer one on the right front, but that's never been, for our combination, that's never worked well for us. Jerry and Steve says, thanks for all your information. Well, we appreciate that. Well, it looks like it's 8 o'clock. We're going to call it a day and call it an evening, and we'll see everybody again here January 22nd. Same time, same place, only January 22nd. Episode 94 coming up.
Getting close to 100.
Yes, getting close to 100. We're definitely going to have to do something big for the 100 one. I don't know who it will be. We'll get a special guest or something for that one. Working on a guest for next week or in 2 weeks. Won't tell you who we're working on, but we're going to get one of our chassis builder friends on here to kind of share maybe some stock car information or whatever. And so, well, anyway, we'll see everybody later. Thanks again for watching, and we appreciate it. And all you guys down there in Yuma, have a great week next week. And all you guys that aren't in Yuma need to watch it on IMCA TV. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.